All right. Welcome to the Rise Up podcast. I am your host, Jonah Mitchell. On this show, I do my best to help you understand that this process does not have to be as difficult when it comes to weight loss and fat loss and living the life that you want to when it comes to your health, and help you get out of the way and just provide a little bit more understanding and clarity on how things actually work, why you think the way that you do, and the practical steps that you can start taking today to start seeing massive transformation. And if this is the first time listening to me, thank you so much. I appreciate you. If you're a longtime listener, former client, current client, I appreciate the absolute hell out of you for taking the time out of your day to listen to my rambles and rants all the time. And if you find this helpful, or you learn something new, or I'm able to shift your perspective even in a small way, I really appreciate it if you take the time to share this episode with at least one person. My entire goal is to help you wherever you're at, and even if I never speak to you, I hope I can make even a small impact on your journey. So without further ado, let's start talking about the real reason why you struggle to stay motivated. The real reason you struggle to stay motivated is very, very simple. And I'm going to kind of jump right into this, but the real reason you struggle with motivation is because you identify, or your identity continues to get in the way of your motivation. That's a big part of it. But let me help you understand something really quick. First and foremost, motivation is a feeling. Just because you're never going to be happy all the time, you're never going to be sad all the time, motivation does not last. And because you believe you need to focus on motivation to get going, to take the action, to make the effort, to do the things that you know are going to help you get to the goals that you want. Well, when a big part of why the motivation doesn't last, your identity, well, you identify as someone who needs motivation. Now, we don't realize how little of our day that we actually have a conscious choice over. A lot of what we do is habitual. About 80 to 90% of everything that we do in our day-to-day is out of habit. Every morning when you wake up, you usually have your morning routine, right? Whatever, it doesn't have to be like this, you wake up, you meditate for 10 minutes and then you stretch and that's your routine. No, it's like you wake up, you hit snooze, you get out of bed, you brush your teeth, you go downstairs, you start the coffee, right? Like that's a routine that you have. And most of our day is built off of these routines that we don't even think about. And this is a big reason why motivation never really lasts, because after that feeling is gone, you revert back to the person you identify as, the person who has the the comfort zone that keeps you stuck, that has a bunch of habits, a bunch of choices that don't necessarily benefit you when it comes to achieving the results that you want. And this is a very common struggle where we all have this wind of energy that's like, oh my God, if I felt like this all the time, it'd be so easy. But after that feeling is gone and life creeps back in, well, stress comes back from work, from family, from whatever you have going on. Well, now, because life is trying to get back in the way, get back to what remind you how you should feel, you go back to what you know. When stress gets higher, our body goes back to what we've identified as, what we've practiced. So because we have so many things on autopilot, 80 to 90% of your day is habit, is habitual. It's what your actions dictate who you see yourself as. And if a part of your identity isn't the part that makes time for exercise, that does their best when it comes to food choices, that finds any way to stay consistent even though things aren't going well, if you're the person who puts yourself on the back burner, takes care of everybody else, and never really takes care of you, and all the time, that's who you identify as. This is a big part why your motivation, when it's not there, you have no will to want to make the change. So really, I mean, everyone has heard motivation is a feeling. You need discipline and all that fun stuff. But really, I want to give you the keys or the 3 steps to no longer need to rely on motivation and change your identity to cultivate what discipline actually is. Because discipline, people have a very common misconception that discipline is just forcing yourself to do something that you don't want to do. And discipline can definitely be a part of that. But really, discipline is doing something, knowing how you'll feel if you don't do it. And the consequences of you not doing it outweigh the consequences of you doing it. For example, when I don't exercise, I physically feel miserable. I'm not as mentally sharp. I'm not as energized. I'm not as focused. And I don't like those feelings, especially for my career. As I talk to multiple people, I have to remember where they're at, what they have going on. I have to distinguish each person individually. And I have to remember a lot of things. So if I'm not doing the thing that helps me be more mentally sharp, helps me stay on top of what I want to do, I'm not going to show up for the people that need me. And I'm not willing to pay those consequences. Even though my job can get hard, my life can get hard, I will still find a way to make an effort to do something for myself physically, because I know what will happen if I don't. So essentially, and I say all this because I did not always identify it as this person. It took me a long time to figure out how to change my identity so that motivation wasn't what I needed. Right? Motivation is always helpful. It's super nice when we have the motivation, the energy to do something, but it is not a reliable resource. Changing our identity to cultivate someone who we truly align with, that will allow us to build discipline that actually serves us in the long run. This is what will take, or this is what will change how you see yourself, how you see your process, and essentially give you every tool to accomplish everything that you want without feeling miserable, without the traditional fall off because the emotion is no longer there. This is the step. So the 3 steps to change your identity, to change the 80 to 90% of the things that you do without thinking, right? This first comes down to self-awareness. Right? Self-awareness, when it comes to changing your identity, you have to identify your patterns. And paying attention to your patterns gives you the ability to choose if you want to continue to respond that way. We choose everything that we do. Yes, life has a way of getting in the way and influencing our choices in a way that doesn't always align with what we want to do, but we can choose to either agree with the stimulus, the environment that we're in, or we can choose to not do the same thing over and over and over again, hoping for a different result, hoping for the next challenge, hoping for the next diet, or hoping for the right time to finally come for you to really focus on yourself. None of those things really happen. And they are not reliable. If we're waiting for that right moment, the right diet, the right time, whatever it is, that person you're identifying as is inevitably always going to be waiting. But if we can learn to identify that pattern of, okay, when I get motivated and I just do really well, but when that motivation's gone, I crash and burn and I go months without trying and it makes me feel miserable. Like, let's identify that pattern now and see, well, I have all or nothing tendencies. Oh, I have food guilt. I have food shame. Foods are good or bad to me. It's like those are the issues that we need to identify as constantly getting in the way of you aligning your life, your actions with who you are. But this comes to self-awareness. This comes with reflection, which is not always comfortable. This is not easy to do, but it's one of the most important steps that we need to do, because if we don't get aware of our patterns that have held us back, or the same problems that we'll inevitably run into, where motivation hits, we're super good for 6 weeks, and then we crash and burn and we start all over again in another 6 weeks. If we don't get aware of that pattern first, it's always going to persist, and you will never actually get to the point where you achieve your goals comfortably, sustainably. It will always be you chasing, and whatever results you create don't actually end up lasting. And it's even more frustration to the point that eventually one day you give up, and then you give into that 80 to 90% of your habitual choices that have kept you stuck. We need to identify the 80 to 90% of the habitual choices and ask ourselves, is this how I want to how I want to portray my day to day, right? And once we have that pattern identified and we start questioning if it's actually in alignment with who we want ourselves to be, and really just start asking yourself, do I want to have this relationship with food? Do I want to look at food as good and bad? Do I want to always let life get in the way? Do I always want to respond the way that I used to? That's how you start identifying the pattern and start, once you become aware, now you can start actually making the conscious decisions, that 10 to 20% of our conscious choices throughout the day. You can start rewiring that 80 to 90% once you become aware, once you identify the pattern, right? So after you have that self-awareness, this is where we can start to shift your identity, right? This is where you get to change the vision of who you believe you are, right? This is part two. Changing the vision, changing your identity is here. It comes from an internal belief first. After we identify who we've been, we identify who we want to be. And this is where when we start asking, after we have the patterns, we start asking, is this the response I always want to have? Or is there a much more aligned way I want to treat the situation? If I feel completely out of control, do I always want to respond that the way that I do, by giving in and eating everything in front of my face and feeling super bloated, super guilty, super frustrated? Or do I want to slow down and find a way to do the best I can and leave a little bit of guilt, leave a lot of the guilt away from my choice, right? That's where you start to change your identity. And this is where we take that, like I was saying, that 10 to 20% of conscious effort is how we start bleeding in to the new to the building into the 80 to 90% of habitual day-to-day behaviors, and create that new identity, that new belief, after you question and after you choose a different response, right? Another example, if you're someone who uses food for stress, you immediately turn to the candy, the chips, whatever it is, right? You identify that pattern. That pattern makes you feel guilty, makes you feel frustrated, and sends you down a path of like, well, I've already started eating like crap. I might as well eat like this the rest of the weekend. And that doesn't sound like a response that would align with someone who wants to lose 30 pounds and feel in control of their food no matter what happens. If you have a stress response, do you want to turn to food and feel guilty about that choice and then spiral to the point where you're making it a lot harder to stay consistent with your goals? If not, who do you want to identify as? Who do you envision yourself as dealing with the stress? How would you rather deal with the stress that doesn't make you feel guilty? And now we get to change the belief, the pattern, and then the belief starts to grow that you can be that person. When everything starts with a thought, and once we question our current thoughts and if they're serving us, then we can change our actions to change our beliefs. But you have to come with awareness, and then you have to know how you want to respond. If the way you're responding now isn't actually helping, there's definitely a better pattern out there that can help with that response, and that's what we need to identify, right? And after we have that pattern, identified, and we shift the decision making, we shift the choices to align better with who we now see ourselves as, away from how we've responded in the past. This is where you cultivate discipline. And there's 3 parts to discipline. It's very fascinating. Discipline isn't just like a thing that just happens. It's incremental. It happens over time. And each part of the 3 parts of discipline doesn't always happen at the same time, right? Because there's active forms of discipline where you are making a choice in a situation, going back to the eating for stress. Like, that's an active form of discipline, to choose something differently than you usually do. One that would align with you, where you want to be and how you want to feel. That's active discipline, making the choice right then and there when it's easier to go back to the old way that you feel. But this is where we get to contemplate our choices, process the consequences of our actions. All consequences aren't bad. They're not. They give us the ability to stop the spiral sooner rather than later. And when we're in that moment in the active discipline where we either choose the food, like choose the food to deal with stress, like the current pattern says, like the current 80 to 90% of our habitual day-to-day says, or we use the 10 to 20% of active of our conscious choices to make a different decision that's going to help us feel better in the long run and start to prove and change how the 80 to 90% of our habitual thoughts think. That's active discipline. And when we do that, we make that active choice. That's how you start cultivating and thinking about, if I don't do this, I will not like the way that I feel. That's where the active part of discipline comes into play. Now, there's a reactive part of discipline. This is where we're not in a lot of control, but we still choose to make the best decision that we possibly can. This is what I like to bring up with my clients when they're going on work trips or they're going on vacations and they don't have control over their food. Well, now we can do what we can to control it if we have time to prepare food and drinks and stuff like that. We can do what we can to be actively disciplined. But when we go out to eat with coworkers or family, and now we're in an environment where we weren't really prepared for, well, now we have to be reactive. We have to know that what our old pattern could have been would be, well, I'm already here, I might as well eat the most calorie dense thing and feel bad about it. Or I can make the most nutrient dense option that's going to help me feel more like in control, enjoy my night with my family, and then move on and get back into control as soon as I can, right? This is reactive discipline. Again, starting or stopping the spiral before it happens and just thinking about the old pattern and making a slightly better decision, a slightly more aligned decision that works for you right then and there in the reaction. Right, because a lot of times our reactions to a moment where we're not in control, we go back to what we know, we go to what's comfortable, and that choice oftentimes doesn't make us feel very great. We can feel guilty, we can feel frustrated, we can feel annoyed by the choice that we made in the reactive response. Oh, I should have made a better choice. I could have made a better choice, but you didn't. So now you're going to constantly think about that. And then your brain's going to go down the old rabbit hole of the 80, 90% and make a bunch of choices that it usually does when it feels guilty, when it feels ashamed, when it feels frustrated. If we can be reactive and make a little bit better choice. And this is what I tell my clients. If you're traveling, if all else fails, can you prioritize protein and color the best way that you can, right? Protein, any animal protein, color, fruit, vegetables. Can you prioritize those two things first? And if you can, chill out. Done. That's you being as disciplined, reactively disciplined in that moment, because it's still a better choice than it would have been. And this is, again, you taking that 10 to 20% of the conscious effort to rewire the 80 to 90% by being reactive. Right. So there's active discipline where we're in a situation where we have control and we can either go down the path that we're used to, or we can make the better choice. We have reactive discipline where we're out of control. And now again, similar point where we're making a choice to either give in to the reactivity or give into our old reactions where we just say, fuck it and eat whatever we want and feel guilty about it. Or we take the reaction to do the best that we can, say that was good enough, and then move on and still actively rewire that 80, 90%. And then there's proactive discipline. This is where we take a little bit of time as our current selves to set our future self up for more success. This is where meal prepping and stuff, meal prepping or having food prepared in any way, any capacity, doesn't always have to be meal prepping, but just taking the time when you have it to set your future self up for success, so you're more likely to make the easier decision. This is essentially, I can't think of the term right now off the top of my head. It's frustrating. But I'm gonna call it pre-framing, pre-framing for right now. Essentially, we are pre-framing our future self to be able to make the more aligned decision easier. So if we have food prepared, again, it doesn't have to be a perfect meal prep, but if we buy a few protein shakes and have those in the fridge ready available because we know we're very busy, and when we get busy, we can often make a more convenient choice. Well, if we make it easier to make the aligned choice with a little bit of proactive discipline of taking an hour out of your day, an hour out of your week to have at least a few meals ready for you, right? This is just one example. There's multiple ways to do this. But if we have that time, now when you're in the usual pattern of your life where it's easy to make the convenient choice that doesn't always align with your goals, well, you already took the time ahead of time to save yourself the decision and choose the food that you have available that's a little bit more aligned with your goals. That's not going to make you feel as guilty or frustrated. And this goes back to what I was talking about before. Discipline is not just forcing yourself to do something. Discipline is doing something because you know how you feel if you don't do it. And when we take this time utilizing each of these each of these types of discipline, this gives us the ability to actively take the 10 to 20% of our conscious thoughts throughout the day and rewire the 80 to 90%. It's going to feel like it's going to take a long time because it also took a long time for you to learn how to tie your shoes. But now you probably tie your shoes without even thinking about it. It just happens. You put them on and you're done. You go about your day. But before, when you were a kid, it felt like it took forever. You always felt like I remember when I was a kid and my shoe came untied and I got so stressed out because we're in line walking to recess. And I had to stop and I tried tying my shoe in front of the kids. And I didn't remember, so I had to call the teacher to help. And then I felt really embarrassed because now a lot of them knew how to tie shoes and I didn't know how to tie shoes. And it was the most stressful life of my little 5-year-old brain. But eventually, because I kept trying and because time goes on, now I don't have to think about tying my shoes at all. I can literally go years without tying my shoe and still remember how to tie my shoe. It takes time to make these decisions or to change these decisions. But if we don't give ourselves the time to practice and we don't give ourselves the opportunities to show up in alignment, if we don't catch the behaviors, identify the patterns, and we don't create a new identity, we don't create a new vision for ourselves, then we'll do what everyone else says discipline is supposed to be. We just force ourselves to do it. We just force ourselves to do it. But a lot of times, if we just force ourselves to do something, there's no love that's created. There's no new reality that actually serves you. It's always you feeling like you have to do something. And when we always feel like we have to do something, well, you always feel like you have to do work. And you don't always want to do work. But when you force yourself to do it, there's resentment that grows over time. And if we don't do it for the reason that we like doing it, if we don't cultivate the vision, the identity that will actually have us create the lifestyle that we want, have the goals that we want, and be able to sustain them because life doesn't throw the same patterns, if we don't get clear on those things, then eventually it will do the same thing that it's used to, because 80 to 90% of everything that we do day in and day out is off of habit. You don't think about it. It just happens. And eventually it will go back to that 80, 90% is your identity. And eventually, no matter how motivated you are, you will go back to the identity. So it's time. We want to use the motivation. We want to use the 10 to 20% of our conscious thoughts to change how we see ourselves and cultivate the belief that we can do that, and know that it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be something in the right direction. And those 3 forms of discipline, again, are just helping you make your life easier for you in the long run. That's it. I don't want you to do anything that you don't want to do. But if you tell me that you want to lose 30 pounds and you always respond the same way that you do when stress hits you and you turn to food, you turn to putting yourself on the back burner, or whatever struggle that you have, what you say and what you do are 2 very different things. And this is how we get what we say and what we do to align, right? This is how we get them to come together, so that the decisions that we start making are more in alignment with who we are and what we want. And that makes everything else a little bit easier in the long run. But this is what really helps you stop relying on motivation and utilize and cultivate your own form of discipline that actually makes you feel the way that you want to, without the same old problems that you're used to. So I hope that made sense. I hope that's helpful. This was a lot of fun. I honestly had no idea what I was going to talk about until I hit record. So, sometimes I don't have a plan for these things. And I know this is another quick example. I like podcasting. I love podcasting. It's one of my favorite forms of creating content. And it's very easy for me to not do it. If I don't feel as prepared, if I don't have a plan going into it, I'll get very in my head about it. But I know that I'm always happier that I did the episode and got it ready. than when I didn't do it. Because then now I'm even more stressed, even more frustrated, and it applies to so many things, not just your own health. It could apply to your hobbies. It could apply to your family. Once you learn this skill to think about your choices, to think about the consequences. Remember, consequences aren't always bad. You get to make decisions because you know how you'll feel if you don't do it. And that's what discipline is. Sometimes you will force yourself, but it will because the context of if I don't do it, I'm going to feel worse. And that's where we change the identity for you to create sustainable change forever, essentially. Because then it's going to take a lot of thinking in the beginning, but once you have that thought process, it's not that hard. It's not as hard. It's not as hard to maintain these thoughts, these decisions. Just a lot of it just feels like a lot up front because, like I said earlier, multiple times, 80 to 90% of everything that we do in a day is habitual, unconscious decisions, and only 10 to 20% of our choices are conscious decisions. So when we're trying to rewire our identity, we have to use that 10 to 20% wisely and identify the patterns, identify the version of you that you want to be, and then take the 3 different types of discipline: active, reactive, and proactive. And that's how you that's where you change the identity and create the lifestyle that you want. So I'm done talking. As I said before, if you found this helpful, please share it with one person or leave me a review or a rating on wherever you're listening. It helps out a lot. Appreciate everyone who does. I had a comment. One of my clients left me a comment. Thank you so much. I think that was in Spotify. So yeah, whatever I guess. And now my energy is gone because I've talked about what I need to talk about. So I'm done talking today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and wherever you're at, I hope it's a good day or night. All right. I'll see you on the next one.